Dude, so I followed all 8 steps of your 8-step plan to gear up my character, and I'm still just 325 item level. I don't understand what happened.
Huh. Maybe you were following the Shadowlands guide, not the Dragonflight one?
There were dinars on it. Like I
Even in
went
Zareth Mortis?
I went and got the
Okay.
dinars from the raid.
Well, that's entirely unrelated to our main topic of this video, which is which is about the dungeon rotation that we've had in Dragonflight so far, and sort of just a check-in with how we're feeling about the new per season rotation, right?
Yeah, okay. So basically, and we made a video about this back in April of 2022. So we've had this for a little bit over a year now, and we were kind of giving our thoughts. Basically, this got announced in some expansion launch media where players were talking about just the dungeons and how they were going to work. Ian Hazzakostas says, yeah, for sure, it's a path we're going to take with Dragonflight Season 1. We're already well underway in updating old dungeons, so the plan is a pool of 8 dungeons for the first season, for the first Mythic Plus season, 4 new Dragonflight dungeons, as well as some old fan favorites across the years. And then they went and gave us Temple of Sethrilus and Court of Stars in this blue post. And so this sparked some discussion as to whether or not this was going to be successful, whether or not this was the correct way that the game could have gone. Because for those who don't know, we have some old dungeons that are in the legacy pool where Underrot, Freehold, Nelth's Lair, and Vortex Pinnacle are all legacy dungeons. And then, of course, the Dragonflight dungeons that we have for Season 2 are Brackenhide Hollow, Neltharis, Uldaman Legacy of Tyr, Asterisk, I guess, and Halls of Infusion are all Dragonflight dungeons.
Yeah, so there's sort of 2 different issues that people have had with the rotating dungeons in theory and in practice.
Sure.
And I think we could kind of address these one by one. So issue number 1 is it good to do a season 1 without all of the Dragonflight dungeons? That's something that I was sort of opposed to doing a season 1 with old dungeons right away. And I was saying, let's do all the Dragonflight dungeons in season 1.
Yeah.
And then in season 2, we can start rotating in old ones.
Dude, I think I was only one of the very few people who were like, let them cook. I want to see how this plays out. I'm down for them to try new stuff. But
yeah, I mean, I sort of came down to like, I like the idea a lot, but I would rather play all the new dungeons in season 1. I'm not sure if too many people have moved their position too much on that particular one. I will say, they have had, I guess, Neltharis ties in very thematically with 10.1, at least in terms of the lore. So there is some lore benefits to delaying a dungeon like that to the later season. But all the other ones, all the other Dragonflight ones are all kind of themed around season 1. And, you have quests going in there, even Halls of Infusion or whatever, you're going in there for your Spark of Ingenuity and stuff.
Yeah,
at the start of season 1. I don't know. I think I still believe that it would have been better to do all of the Dragonflight dungeons as season 1, but it definitely didn't work out awfully the way that they did it, and I think it ended up being fine, that part of it.
Yeah, so that was one option, right? Is like instead they do all 8 at launch and then break it into 4 and 4 with legacy dungeons and for seasons 2 and 3. Yeah.
And that would have addressed the other main criticism that exists about rotating dungeons, which is 8 entirely new dungeons between season 2 and season 1 is a lot of new learning to do.
Correct.
It's also a lot of balancing stress upon the devs, right? Like that. It's you have 8 dungeons come out, you fix them up over the course of several months, you make them well balanced, and then instantly you have another 8 that are broken and need a bunch of balancing changes. And we're sort of seeing right now, we're in the midst of a season 2 where after the first couple of weeks, there's been some radio silence on some pretty, in my opinion, necessary hotfixes that need to land on some dungeons here, like Neltharis and Halls of Infusion, Nelth's Lair, Vortex Pinnacle.
So now the upside, though, is I would say the replayability is certainly higher, right? Having 8 brand new dungeons every single season, that is going to increase just like the learning curve. So typically I find that like the first time experiencing things and the ability to be able to learn and build foundational knowledge on what you've previously learned. And I think that this is one of the advantages of the system that they did select. I find that it engages me more because if I had 4 dungeons from last season that were in this season that I already knew how to play, or the only thing that was changing actually was thundering leaving, right? Like, and then now I'm learning it with, okay, maybe some new affixes and whatnot. What does that look like? Because I think the texture of that looks very different too. And do they have to actually rebuff dungeons potentially if thundering goes away, right? Because those dungeons might have been tuned relative to thundering.
Right. Another potential problem in this sort of counterfactual world where season 2 had half dungeons from season 1 and half new dungeons. Do you remember when Cathedral of Eternal Night was released and everybody hated that dungeon?
Yeah.
A lot of that was because it was new in every other dungeon we were used to, right? And so if you have a season where there's half dungeons we're used to and half dungeons we're not used to, that might cause a problem to those dungeons that are new in terms of us just feeling bad about them because we haven't learned them yet. And they're up against dungeons that we have learned. So,
which, I mean, people have presented that argument in regards to Freehold and Underrot because they've played those dungeons more regularly. But like that's I feel like more like a high end argument because we were sweating keys back in BFA, and not everybody was sweating keys back in BFA, and it's been a while since that expansion was current. We do also have some other posts to even look back and reflect on too, because I think it's actually a pretty important thing to discuss. Ellis Mir saying season 1 Mythic Plus needs to be only the 8 new Dragonflight dungeons. Rotating into old dungeons, something the community really wants for later seasons to keep the Mythic Plus pool fresh, but not something for the first season that blocks us from experiencing literally half new content. And then he's talking about
again, this
community.
is feedback delivered in a
it's a tweet.
Optimistic about Dragonflight way, which has aged pretty well. I do still agree with this. I do think season 1 M plus. I think it would have been better to be the 8 new Dragonflight dungeons as well. But it is something where I feel like it hasn't been like I think people were more negative about it then than they are now.
Yeah.
I think people are more kind of on board with it being with there being some old dungeons in from the start. Although I don't know, it's worth mentioning, like a lot of the old dungeons have been kind of badly balanced compared to the newer ones, which wasn't necessarily something I was expecting, especially after PTR, because PTR, it felt like the Dragonflight dungeons were going to be the ones badly balanced, but they've been doing a really good job, especially in Season 1. Ruby Life Pools, Azure Vault, Algathar Academy, and Naka Defensive all got pretty aggressively balanced, but stuff like Temple of the Jade Serpent was just left in the state that it was in for the whole season, and I think Vortex Pinnacle this season is threatening to do the same thing. Yeah, this season is an even worse. So last season had Quarter Stars and Shadow Moon. This season has Underrot as the easiest
mostly,
key by far. Which it's on the front page, but it's also, if you go to the 1000th page, if you go up, click the next button, and then go up into the URL and change the 2 to 1000, and see what we're looking at on that page, right? Like, see how we're doing here. It's to be fair, okay. This lands in the 2 chest range. Change it to 1,100, which will be in the 1 chest range, because Underrot's easier to 2 chest than the other dungeons. So let's change it to seeing just what some 1 chested 22s are looking like, right? And again, 7 out of 20 on this page are Underrots, right? Like that's it should be 1 out of 8, but it's actually almost 1 out of 2 of the dungeon runs being done are Underrots, which is that's not good. I don't know that. I mean, you're as able fun to do that, as I think Underrot is. That's not good.
You're just able to do that dungeon at such a significantly higher level than any other key. So typically people will end up tending to lean towards that dungeon. In addition to that, it becomes your homework key. It becomes the key that rerolls all of your other dungeons because you're able to do it so much easier. I think that is definitely a downside of the rotating dungeon effect, where I think that they would probably have this problem almost regardless, right? I think it's just an issue of the legacy dungeons in general.
I don't think it needs to be. I mean, I think that this is just they need to quickly identify this and buff Underrot week 1 is I think the answer. Do it before we get too used to it being that easy, and the problem is they already tried, right? They buffed a bunch of frontals in Underrot, but it turns out you don't have to stand in the frontals. You can stand off to the side of them and they don't hit you. And that makes it so that if you increase the damage of the frontals, it doesn't change anything. And then also they added a bunch of worms, but that also didn't do too much to padding in the dungeon. So
I have a question.
It's a hard problem to solve, but Halls of Valor was pretty well balanced, right? Halls of Valor for its season was pretty well balanced. Neltharion, I guess almost all of the old dungeons in this season are either too easy or too hard, maybe, but
Nellslayer is
Freehold's maybe reasonable.
Nellslayer is the highest key that's timed.
Yeah, that's true. The single highest key is a Nellslayer,
which it's lenient timer hard dungeon is what I will say about Nellslayer.
Yeah, it's exactly that it's a weird dynamic.
So I will say though that that's something that's also that we have to kind of bring up and like we can spitball about it a little bit. Would they have been able to do the stuff that they've done with affix revamp and removal of seasonal affixes if they actually came out guns blazing with the 8 Dragonflight dungeons? Because I feel like that's actually going to be that would actually be very difficult for them to get away from if they started with 8 Dragonflight dungeons and were moving into a different season, as opposed to completely 8 new dungeons.
I think that having new dungeons, I think that a good world to move into would be like new dungeons and no seasonal at the start of an expansion.
Yeah.
And then season 3 and season 4 can be, now we're used to these dungeons a little bit. Let's do a seasonal as well. Because you could imagine going back, like, imagine if they just brought back Awakened with Algathar Academy in season 3 or season 4, right? Like, season 3 or season 4, we just bring back Awakened, great old affix, and it entirely is different in the dungeons, right? And then we get to do Awakened Algathar Academy, and that entirely revitalizes pathing in a dungeon like that, right? Or Awakened in Knock, I guess not in Knock It Offensive, but in like Azure Vault or something like that, right? There's a lot of ways that they could bring back the seasonals, good seasonals, or make a good new seasonal at the end of the expansion, and then have the start of the expansion be the dungeons or the novelty. Yeah.
Okay, so now just speaking more broadly about rotating dungeons, and this is something that Ian's actually addressing in this post from, when was this? July. Ian's addressing it in this post. He goes, whenever you're 12 to 15 months in the same dungeons, to reach the level of sophistication and refinement actually is very challenging, and it's very difficult for Blizzard to serve the community and to serve the Mythic Plus community to create engaging content after 12 to 15 months of the same dungeons. I will say that I think rotating dungeons in general, regardless of how they've done them, I think that rotating dungeons has been a massive success in my book. So I do think that there is I actually like what they've done with the 8 brand new dungeons, but I'm also somebody who does dungeons a lot. So like, of course I would like that, but I think that just in general, looking back at what we previously had from Shadowlands, where it was the same 8 dungeons for a long time, that sucked. I am glad that we have gotten away from that, and I'm glad that we have gotten into a thing where we are changing out a large portion of our dungeons every single season. Yeah,
the overwhelming learning curve type problem is one that I would like to... I am curious if people are experiencing that, so that would be people who are playing the game less. I imagine probably not too many of the people watching this video, but you guys are probably, pretty serious WoW fans, but yeah, if you are somebody who's experiencing that, do let us know in the comments as well, because I do want to know if that's something that I'm sure that they're trying to gather data on this as well to see if it is a problem. My guess is that even if it is a problem, they could land on 4 new, 4 old, and like tune the 4 newer dungeons to be a little bit less harsh than the 4 older dungeons as well on a baseline mathematical level, and that could lower the burden on how much new stuff we have to learn each season.
What's your expectations for next season? Because like we know that we are getting the mega dungeon as a new Mythic Plus dungeon next season, so that's at least 2 brand new dungeons. Do you expect it to be just 10 Dragonflight dungeons? That's kind of what I was expecting, but I'm not exactly sure what we're going to get.
Okay. My money is mega dungeon.
So that's 2.
Yeah. 2 Dragonflight Season 1 dungeons.
Okay, so that's 4.
I know. 3 Dragonflight Season 1 dungeons.
That's 5. And 3 Legacy?
3 Legacy dungeons? Yeah.
I feel like 8 is the right number for a dungeon pool. Like I will say, after having played 8, it depends on the freshness of the dungeons. But I think that from going from very little knowledge to a lot of knowledge, I think that 8 is the correct amount for a dungeon pool. I wouldn't hate if it was all 8 Dragonflight dungeons plus the new the mega dungeons in Mythic Plus, though. But I guess that would feel a little bit weird, because you're going to have, Brackenhide, Halls of Infusion, Neltharis, and Uldaman 2 seasons
in a row.
And
then where do you go season 4, right? Like, if they're assuming there is a season 4 this time,
they're not going to scrap it. Surely they don't scrap it 2 expansions in a row.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you can do the mega dungeon again for season 4, like they did between season 3 and 4 in Shadowlands, but then is it just all legacy dungeons, or are you reprising some Dragonflight dungeons for their 3rd or 4th?
That's a lot of work. I think that's.
I think they need to save some Dragonflight dungeons to not be in season 3 so that they can be in season 4 instead, and then every Dragonflight dungeon is in 2 of the 4 seasons in Dragonflight. That's my theory.
They could just go back to season 1 dungeons.
Yeah, I would kind of like to see them do a little bit more rotation and a little bit more like even if it means some dungeons are back to back in season 2 and 3, even making it so that we're not always seeing the same dungeons next to each other. But I don't really care that much. Either way they do it, I'm down to see how it feels.
I will say though, This tweet from Ellesmere has aged quite well. I think that in general, though, rotating dungeons is phenomenal. I think that just as an idea, I think Blizzard.
That's the thing is everybody's pretty much agreed, right? Like I was on Ellesmere's team on this one. I still am. I do think it's less important. Like I wouldn't I think it's worked out better than I thought it would to not do the 8 new Dragonflight dungeons in season 1. But I would still like to see them try it in 11.0 to do just the 8 new dungeons in season 1. But if they decide that they liked it like this, I'm fine with it. This is fine.
I've had a lot of fun with the 8 brand new dungeons every single season. I think that
I do like the rotation. I mean, the rotation. I think every high-end M+er I know likes the fact that it's rotating. Although, we love to complain, and of course, everybody has their several dungeons that they love to complain about. That's one of the most fun parts about being an M+er is the complaining. So
overall, though, I found that this season is quite enjoyable to play. They've done a lot of different stuff with like the affixes. They changed up like how the seasonal ends up functioning. I think that there's been some problems with the dungeons themselves, and I will say that this isn't my favorite dungeon pool to have ever played, but I do think that like the general landscape of the metagame, how the metagame functions, how the game functions just as a whole has allowed me to enjoy this season heavily.
I think it's the class balance and like the robustness of the talent system and the gear being good. Like those 3 things being true can support a pretty... even if the dungeons are bad, even if the raid fights are bad a little bit, even if they're mediocre, it's fine as long as the skeleton of the game is good. And the skeleton of the game is, I think, the best it's ever been right now. This game, like the base class balance and the base itemization systems, really, it's funny because I think that season 1, season 2 of Dragonflight M+, and also season 1 and season 2 of Dragonflight Raid have been some of the weaker raid and dungeon offerings of the past like 5 years. Like they've been in the bottom half, I think, but they've just been so fun in terms because of the supporting systems.
We had the Korthia incident that one time.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I mean, you look at like Castle Nathria, an all-time and exciting raid. BFA had a bunch of great raids and dungeons and stuff, but a lot of it gets overshadowed by stuff like island farms or Korthia farms and stuff. And this season doesn't have any of that garbage, which
I will
makes
say
the dungeons
too,
themselves a lot of fun.
I will also say too that like something that I found actually particularly annoying with both Shadowlands and BFA is like the replayability of the dungeons on the second, the third, the fourth season that you were playing them. I felt like even though there was a seasonal affix, that didn't feel like it was enough of like a difference.
Yeah, I do think Vortex Pinnacle is going to be having that vibe well into this season.
Shadow Moon Burial Grounds had that vibe for me, but it was
Shadow Moon Burial Grounds had that vibe insta.
Yeah,
Underrot also I think is building up towards that just by virtue of it being half the keys you do. But yeah, I agree. It's you get a lot more novelty for free by doing this rotation, and that's that's I think all of us have been really excited for the rotations because of that. So yeah, I think it's been a resounding success so far, and the best part is I think it's been a success, and there's a lot of room to improve, which means there's room for it to become an even more awesome stuff.
And this is definitely I think that they went for a home run with the dungeons that they picked too, adding Freehold and Underrot, which were like very much asked for.
Yeah, those are Freehold. I think probably the most popular M+ dungeon of all time.
I find it fun to play still right now. Yeah, I still find it fun.
I think that there are ways that you can see it's aged maybe a little bit less well than it is in our memories, but it's definitely still one of the fun dungeons this season. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Any thoughts that you guys have in the comment section down below?
Comments.
Have you been liking the rotating dungeons? Do you find them a bit too daunting at times? Do you find them just right in regards to the freshness of the dungeons and increasing the replayability for you? How have you guys felt about that overall? And we will see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.
Bye.